Hello everyone. Today we are going to be reviewing punctuation marks in English. So let's get into it. Now, as you can see on the screen, we have various pictures depicting various punctuation marks that are found in English. Now, today we are actually going to address all of these. You're going to see what they look like. Well, you already can see what they look like. You're going to learn how they are used, and of course, you're going to learn how they are used through examples, okay? So we are going to analyze each punctuation mark today. But before we get into each particular punctuation mark, we need to understand what they do in general. So these refer to a group of symbols used to separate and clarify the meaning of written material, okay? So punctuation marks need to be placed within written material, all right? But this will be transferred to speech because without punctuation marks, we are not going to know how to read material, right? Because sometimes we may need to pause, sometimes we may need to add some emotion, or we may even have to change our tone. So punctuation marks are very crucial to grammar, okay? Now, they also affect meaning. And this is when the definition it says clarify the meaning. Let me give you an example. Let's use the apostrophe. If I say it's, there are two ways that that can be spelled. I could say it apostrophe s or its. In speaking, the difference would not be noticeable, but in writing, there's a big difference. If I say it apostrophe s, that is an abbreviation of it is. It's a contraction of it is. But if I say if I write its, no, that is a possessive adjective. So that is different, right? So the only way you can know the difference will be in writing. That would not be noticeable in speech because it's the contraction and it's the possessive adjective are pronounced the same. They're pronounced the same. Are pronounced in the same way. So you will not know the difference in speech, but they will be different in writing. Another example, if I use an imperative sentence, like a command, and I tell someone to read the book, and I use a full stop, that means that I do not really have to use any emotion behind it. I can just say read the book, full stop. But if I use an exclamation mark at the end of that imperative sentence, then I need to say it with more emphasis or more emotion. So I would have to say, read the book, read the book. So yes, punctuation marks are very important, okay? So we are going to commence with a full stop, also known as a period. So its purpose is to end sentences. These sentences will be declarative or imperative. So declarative means that a statement has just been made. That's all, right? And imperative means that, you're talking about a command, an order. So for example, Mary had a little lamb. Full stop. That's just a statement that was made. Mary had a little lamb. It just stated what Mary had. Do not do that. That is an imperative. And like I said earlier, if it is followed by a full stop, that means you don't really have to use any emotion behind it, right? You can just say in a neutral voice. You don't really have to convey any emotion behind it, okay? Secondly, it can be used after reported questions. This is when a question is not being directly asked, but is being reported by the speaker. For example, she asked me if I knew what to do. So yes, we are reporting, this is reported speech. So we are not quoting her verbatim. Therefore, we do not use a question mark because a question is not being directly asked. So she asked me if I knew what to do. It's reported. So if I were quoting her verbatim, then the punctuation would have to change, right? Similarly, my teacher asked what time it was. She didn't, it was not what time it is, what time it was, it's in the past. So it's a reported question. Okay, so we use a full stop then. Just understand that if a question is being asked indirectly, then it must be followed by a full stop, not a question mark, right? Thirdly, it is used in abbreviations. We have it it is used in titles like Mr., Doctor, Latin abbreviations like etc., e.g. meaning for example, and i.e. meaning like that is. So the last two abbreviations are basically used for explanations, okay? And then finally, we have time periods. So AM, PM, and you see the full stop would fall between the letters as well as after them, okay? Question mark. So its purpose is to indicate that a sentence is a question. And I would have alluded to this earlier. Only direct questions will require a question mark. So this is where a question is being directly asked. Where's my coat? See, question mark. Is that true? Question mark. Now, it is many interrogative sentences will start with an interrogative word such as what, who, where, when, how, etc. Why, right? So you'll know that a question is being asked directly. But they don't always have to start with those words because as you see in the second example, it starts with the verb. So that's just a little pointer, right? Secondly, a question mark should be used when a sentence is half statement and half question. So if we have a sentence that contains a statement and a question, we still need to use a question mark at the end. For example, you stole his money, didn't you? So you see the first part would be a statement, but then the second part is a question, right? Thirdly, when it comes to quotations, the question mark should be placed within the quotation marks if a question falls within it. Now, Robert asks, will you be my wife? Now, you see, we use question mark there because that's a direct question. That is not really being reported. That is what he actually asked. So that has to go within quotation marks. And that's actually what we're going to do next. So that's a question and it falls within a quote. So the question mark goes within the quote. And that would apply to any other punctuation mark. If it falls within a quote, the punctuation mark will go within the the quotation marks, right? So yes, quotation marks. These are used to quote speech verbatim, word for word. For example, she said, I am tired. So this is exactly what she said. This is not a paraphrase, a rewording. This is what she said. Please note, once the quote contains a complete sentence, it must start with a capital letter. Yes. Right. So you must use a capital letter if you're talking about a complete sentence, right? And they're also not required for indirect quotes. So for example, she said that she was tired. Now that's reported. So the subject changes. It went from I, first person, because we are quoting her, to third person, right? So we don't need the quotation marks there because we're saying we're not quoting her verbatim. It's a reported speech. So we don't need quotation marks. She said that she was tired. But she said, I am tired. That is exactly what she said. Okay? Now, what occurs when we have a quote within a quote? So this is what happens. So if we have a quote within a quote, single quotation marks are used. For example, Kayla said, Chris will be happy. I always wanted that, he'll say. So as you see, the single quotation marks are placed around the quote that is found within the quote. So we begin to quote by when we say Chris, right? So that's when the speech begins. But I always wanted that is what Chris would say. So that falls within the quote. So those will go in, those have to, so single quotation marks have to be placed, they have to go in single quotation marks, and then we end off he'll say. So this entire sentence was said by, or this entire statement was said by Kayla, but I always wanted that would be a quote from Chris, but it falls within Kayla's speech, so it has to go in single quotation marks, right? Mhm. Quotation marks are also used for technical terms. This is because these terms are used in an unusual way. In other words, the usage varies from the standard usage, right? So we know that words will have their traditional meanings, but if we're using these words in a way that differs from the standard usage, then we have to put them in quotation marks. So anytime you see a word and it's placed in quotation marks, that means that that word takes on a different meaning. So I did some experimenting in my college days. Well, I did not do sciences, so the word experimenting would have to have a different meaning in that context. Hence, it is placed in quotation marks, right? They are often used for the titles of various works, such as episodes in a TV show, chapters in a book. All right, so the Dream Team, this is the third episode in the series, The People versus O.J. Simpson, American Crime Story. That's a very good series to check out, by the way. So the Dream Team would have been the third episode. So each episode would be placed within quotation marks. Yes. So that would be that. The comma. Now the comma has quite a few uses, right? Should I say it has quite a number of uses, not quite few. Whatever. No, I didn't mean that. I meant quite a number of uses. So the first use is going to be to separate independent clauses, otherwise known as complete sentences, when they are joined by the 7 coordinating conjunctions and, but, for, or, nor, so, and yet. So we like ice cream, but they prefer cake. As you see, the second sentence, they prefer cake, that's a complete sentence, but they are joined by the coordinating conjunction, one of the coordinating conjunctions, but. So we use a comma to separate them. So the comma will occur at the end of the first sentence. So we like ice cream, comma, but they prefer cake. You see? So the comma will go after the first sentence. Then we will have the coordinating conjunction and the second sentence. 2, after introductory clauses, phrases, or words. So whenever we have an introductory statement, whether it's a clause, whether it's a phrase, whether it's a word, we use a comma. For example, however, there was a recession in 2009. So however introduces a statement. And you would find that a lot of the transition words and phrases will be followed by commas, right? For example, firstly, for example is another example. For example, comma, and then we introduce our statement. So these are used to introduce. So they must be followed by a comma, right? So if we want to talk about consequence, we could say consequently, comma, or as a result, comma, right? So any of those will require commas afterwards, right? 3, to separate elements that are not essential to the meaning of the sentence. The comma is used at the start of the pause and at the end of the pause. Okay. So for example, Ronaldo, a good football player, is from Portugal. As you see, Ronaldo is obviously the subject. We use a comma there. A good football player is from Portugal. So we list some qualities. And then at the end, we have a nationality. So those two elements are just pieces of information about Ronaldo. But Ronaldo is the focus. Ronaldo is the subject, right? So the comma indicates that what follows would basically be just additional information. Okay? So this is why it says the separate elements that are not essential to the meaning of the sentence. Right? Continuing. To separate three or more words, phrases, or clauses written in a series. So if we want to list items in a series, we use commas to separate them. Mary ate eggs, bacon, and bread. Now, it's worth noting that sometimes the comma is not used after the penultimate or second last item in the list. Sometimes it is used, sometimes it is not used, right? It depends on the style, but you can include it. But you can also choose not to include it. Okay. But for the other elements within the series, those need to be separated by a comma, right? Next, in the names of dates and addresses. I was born on November 8th, 1997. Yes, that's my birthday. So you can take note of that. So if I wanted to include a day, like if I'm given the date, I could say today is Saturday, December 9th, 2023. So Saturday, comma, December 9th, comma, 2023. So we use commas to separate elements within dates, right? Another example, this time we're dealing with an address. Needham's Point, St. Michael, Barbados. Right? So we see we have a comma after Needham's Point, St. Michael, the parish, and in the country, Barbados. And that's actually the address of the Hilton Hotel, right? And finally, to introduce a quote after an explanatory phrase. So if we want to introduce a quote, but we have used an explanatory phrase, we use a comma. Okay? So the teacher said, comma, I am proud of everyone. And that's the quote, of course. Right? But you use a comma because it's not a complete sentence. There's actually another punctuation mark that you use if you want to introduce a quote, but it's a complete sentence. But you only use a comma because it is not a complete sentence. It just seeks to explain what will follow. So the teacher said, the teacher exclaimed, the teacher stated, whatever. It's just an explanatory phrase. It's not a complete sentence, right? Moving along. Apostrophe. So the apostrophe has three uses. It can be used to indicate possession, right? So we add the apostrophe and then we usually would add S. Sometimes we just add the apostrophe if it's plural. So we could say the girl's car is new. And if we had it as plural, then the apostrophe would go after the S, right? To indicate that the car belongs to the girls as a plural, right? But because it's singular, it would be apostrophe S, right? So yes, that's how the apostrophe works in English. It is used for possession, right? Contractions, this would refer to abbreviations, meaning that a word has been shortened. We'll do it tomorrow. The apostrophe double L would be short for we will. So we will do it tomorrow, right? That is what it is done. That is how it is formed, right? Right. So anytime you see a contract, but contractions are oftentimes not advisable for academic writing. They're more restricted to informal context, right? So those are shortened form of a word. We can use to shorten a word, we can use an apostrophe. And we can use it for plurals of letters, numbers, and symbols. Dario received A's on his report. So that means he received more than one A. And there are two H's in my name. We don't just add S, we would add apostrophe S, right? So that's right. That's right. The exclamation mark. The exclamation mark is simply used for exclamatory sentences and interjections. An interjection would be a statement that is used to convey some form of emotion, right? So, example, please do your homework. I should say that more emphatically. Please do your homework. Right. The exclamation mark means that it has to be said with some emotion, some emphasis, right? And the second example would be an interjection, which is used to indicate surprise, to convey surprise, right? Whoa! Or even amazement, right? So that's what an exclamation mark is used for, to just convey some level of emotion, right? The colon. Now the colon has three uses. Firstly is used to introduce a list at the end of a complete sentence. So I have traveled to many countries, colon, Italy, France, Japan, and Russia. Now, please pay attention to the last part, at the end of a complete sentence. So you must have a sentence before you introduce a colon. So I could not have said, I have traveled to colon and then start to list the countries. That would not be correct. I have traveled to many countries, so that is a sentence itself. Then I list the colon, I place the colon, and then I would list the countries that I would have been to, okay? Secondly, to introduce a quote at the end of a complete sentence. So this is where we get the difference between the colon and the comma when it comes to quotes, because a comma can also be used to introduce a quote. But the difference is that with a comma, we will only use an introductory or an explanatory phrase, whereas with a colon, we have to use a complete sentence. My teacher always said the same thing. Practice makes permanent. I actually had a teacher who told me that when I was at secondary school. She was one of my favorite teachers and still is to this day, right? So if she's watching this, she knows who she is. Right. So yes, my teacher always said the same thing. Practice makes permanent. And of course, we capitalize the first word because it is a complete sentence, right? And thirdly, to connect two independent clauses or complete sentences if the second is a restatement or an explanation of the first. For example, life is a road. Every path takes you somewhere. Right. So in this case, we place the colon after the first sentence, but the second sentence has to clarify, explain, or expand upon the first sentence. So life is a road. What does that mean? It means every path takes you somewhere. So the second sentence explains or clarifies the first. So you will use a colon there, right? And the first word must be capitalized if you're talking about a complete sentence, right? Mm-hmm. So as you see, these are two sentences and they're connected. But the second one explains or expands upon the first. Now, the first word after the colon must be capitalized if there's a complete sentence or a proper noun. So, for example, it was Susan's favorite time of the year, Christmas. Now, Christmas is one word. That's not a complete sentence. But Christmas is a proper noun. So it has to be capitalized. But if it were a common noun, then it would be written in lowercase. Okay? Yes. And this punctuation mark is often confused with the punctuation mark that we're about to get to. a semicolon. Not only are they different in their appearance, but they also have completely different functions. So a semicolon is used to join two related independent clauses or complete sentences without using a conjunction. So when we want to join two related sentences without using a conjunction, we use a semicolon. For example, Mark went to university, Chris went to trade school. So the semicolon in this context is basically replacing a, a conjunction. Because I could say Mark went to university and Chris went to trade school. I could also say Mark went to university, but Chris went to trade school. So the semicolon replaces a conjunction. And as you see, the two sentences are related, right? Mark went one place, Chris went another place, okay? So the sentences are connected, and to connect them, we use a semicolon. But they are two complete sentences, just remember that. And they are related. So in this context, if we want to use a semicolon, we have to have two sentences, two complete sentences that are related to each other. And the first word is not capitalized, but of course, because Chris is a proper noun, it's the name of a person, so it has to be capitalized. But normally, the first word is not capitalized, okay? And the second usage of a semicolon is to separate items on the list where there are already two or more commas. For example, I want to travel to many countries. I want to go to Venice, Italy, Glasgow, Scotland, Paris, France, and Madrid, Spain. Now, the comma, if you look at this closely, the comma is used to separate the city from the country, right? But what you need to realize is that if we did not place the semicolon, it would be a little harder to understand which parts of it go together. So I want to go to Venice, Italy, semicolon, Glasgow, Scotland, semicolon, Paris, France, and Madrid, Spain. So the semicolon being placed after Italy and Scotland allows us to know that Venice and Italy go, that's one. Glasgow and Scotland, that's another. And Paris, France will be separate. Paris, France, and Madrid, Spain are already separated by a conjunction. So those are easy to read. But the first two, we would need the semicolon so that we know which parts go together. So the semicolon is basically used to further separate items on a list that have already been separated by comma, but where the clarity is not at the best. So the list already has commas. So there is some level of separation, but the commas do not do enough. We need the semicolons to help separate the items on the list. So those are the two uses of a semicolon. As you see, they're completely different to the colon, even though they have a similar appearance, right? But many persons confuse the two. Hyphen. Now, a hyphen is used to join words or pairs of words. So it is used in compound words. Words that comprise two or more words, right? So we have compound numbers, 55, 66. Compound adjectives. Kayla is a hardworking woman. But pay attention here. If the compound adjectives appear before the noun, then the hyphen must be placed between them. But if they appear after the noun, the hyphen is not required. For example, they are well-mannered. So you see that in that case, the compound adjective follows the noun, so the hyphen is not required. However, if it is placed before the noun, like in hardworking woman, then there must be a hyphen. So that's a grammar rule. Just remember that. And compound nouns, sister-in-law. Now, a hyphen is often confused with another punctuation mark, and that other punctuation mark is called a dash. Oh, I was jumping ahead. So these are just some more examples of the hyphen. I was jumping ahead. So it is used with prefixes like self, ex, and all. So we have self-respect, ex-girlfriend, all inclusive. So those words must be used with a hyphen. So the prefix along with the noun, right? Or the other word. With the suffix elect. So anytime we use elect as a suffix, we have to use a hyphen. All right. So as I was saying before, the hyphen is often confused with the dash, but the dash has different uses, and the dash is actually longer than the hyphen, as you'll see shortly. So when it comes to the dash, there are two dashes in English. So we have the shorter dash, which is the end dash, which is used to mark ranges. So this would translate as to or through. For example, the First World War, 1914 through 1918, or 1914 to 1918, was a catastrophe. Yes. Another example, pages 46 to 54. Right. So it would translate as to or through. So the first dash is a shorter dash, and it's called end dash. And that is used to mark ranges. On the other hand, the longer dash is called M dash, and it is used to separate additional information or mark a break in a sentence. For example, dark leafy greens dash, such as spinach, kale, and chard, are an important part of a healthy diet. So you see the dash is used to mark breaks within the sentence, right? Now, I must admit that this dash is not really used as often as the other one, which is the end dash. So you don't really have to worry too much about this one. For sure, the other dash is used a lot more frequently, for sure, right? And as you see, as you look at the image beneath the material, you would see the different lengths of the punctuation marks. So that's another way that you can identify them. You can identify them by their purpose as well as their length. So the hyphen is going to be the shortest that is used in compound words. And dash is going to be used, and that's a bit longer than the hyphen. That's going to be used to mark ranges. And finally, we have the longest, which is M dash, and that is going to be used to mark breaks in a sentence or to introduce or separate additional information, right? Yes. Ellipsis. Ellipsis. Right. Ellipsis. Right. I don't know why that gives me issues to pronounce. Right. So ellipsis. 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 Yes. So ellipsis. Ellipsis. Right. So this is used to indicate that a word or a group of words has been deliberately left out of a sentence. So that's what it means. And these are represented by the three dots, right? And the three dots will appear where the omission occurs, right? So that's what we call that is the function of an ellipsis, right? So let's look at the example. I stopped believing in Santa Claus when my mother took me to him in a department store and he asked for my autograph. So you see that's the original sentence or quote. So the omission, I stopped believing in Santa Claus when ... he asked for my autograph. So as you see, my mother took me to see him in a department store, and that has been eliminated. So that part is not really important. I stop using semicolons when. So we don't need to know all those other details. So this is why the ellipsis is placed there. Okay? So we can use, and this is really going to mainly apply to speech, right? So the ellipsis is there to show that whatever it was omitted was not important to the to understanding the meaning of whatever it is that's being said, right? So that's all it means. And that was said by Shirley Temple. All right. Brackets and parentheses, right? So brackets and parentheses, right? So these are used to clarify or explain a part of a sentence that is not present, especially in a direct quotation. So we'll start with brackets. I watched that movie Nowhere last night. So when we say the movie, what movie are we referring to? So I put the brackets nowhere, right? So that's not present, right? So that clarifies what I mean when I said movie. It identifies the movie that I'm referring to, right? Secondly, these are used to enclose additional information which can clarify or explain the sentences. So they're similar. Brackets and parentheses are similar, right? I am going to my grandfather's house, my mother's father today. So my grandfather's house, that will clarify what I mean by grandfather because I could be, I mean, who I mean by grandfather because it could be my mom's father or my dad's father. So there is a slight difference. And as you see, the brackets are different. So with brackets, we are going to include something that is not mentioned, that was not mentioned within the code, okay? But with parentheses, I keep thinking this is Spanish, parentheses, right? We are going to put brackets to explain something that was said, right? So my grandfather's house, that the what is stated in the parentheses will be an explanation of that. But with the brackets, that will refer to something that will refer to what. But well, to be honest, if you think about it, they're actually similar, very similar. Yeah. So what movie am I talking about? Nowhere. That was not, but grandfather was mentioned, right? So that's just clarifying who I am referring to. But to be honest, they're similar. They're actually very similar. They're very, very similar. And parentheses can actually be regarded as brackets, just a different, just a different shape. But they're very similar. They're both basically used to clarify sentences, right? But I would say that the square brackets are more going to mention something specific, whereas the parentheses would just add additional information that would explain something that was, yeah, that was mentioned before. But like I said, they're very similar, right? The slash. So the slash is used to indicate or. So like dear sir slash madam, dear sir or madam. It could be used for fractions to indicate per in measurements of speed or prices, etc. So the speed limit is 80 kilometers per hour. So the slash would mean per. I charge $25 per hour for my online classes. So that would be like per hour, right? Per hour. And abbreviations, W/O means without. A/C means account number. So A/C account number and W/O means without. All right. We can use the slash to separate the day, month, and year. So if you write it in this format, this is where we'll use the slash. So the tsunami occurred on the 10th, on 10/05/2023. So that would be May 10th, 2023. Sometimes the month is written first. So that could also be written, the tsunami occurred on 05/10/2023, which would be May 10th, 2023, in another format. But I use the format of I prefer to put the day first, right? And finally, to show connecting and conflicting relationships between two words. So brother/sister, love/hate. So those are connecting and conflicting at the same time. That's right. All right, so this brings us to the end of this lesson on punctuation marks. So I hope that you are now far more confident and that you understand how to use these different punctuation marks. Okay, so I want to thank you for watching and see you in the next one.